Hello and welcome to the second of the conversation with the leader and deputy of Cheshire East Council. I'm here with Councillor Sam Corcoran, the leader of the council.
Hello.
And Councillor Craig Brown, deputy leader of the council.
Hello.
We've invited questions from residents across the borough for the leader and the deputy to answer today. We've had more than 20 questions that have come through to us, so we're going to try and deal with as many of those as possible. The first question comes from Mostyn in Macclesfield, and he's asking about town centre regeneration. So Mostyn asks, as I keep reading about the regeneration of Crewe, I was just wondering where the money for the regeneration of Macclesfield has gone. And Mostyn mentions the works in Castle Street public realm and asks whether that money may have better been spent on potholes.
Well, thank you for the question. Firstly, if I could say that Cheshire East Council has been able to access about £23 million worth of regeneration funding through the government's Towns Fund. So this isn't something that's funded through your council tax, but it's money that's made available specifically to Crewe. Linked to its deprivation indices. So far it's been helpful in allowing projects such as the restoration of the market hall and is funding currently the rebuilding of the Crewe bus station. By contrast, the Castle Street project in Macclesfield has been funded entirely by Cheshire East Council. And that project has already resulted in a number of new businesses moving into the area, for example, the Prime Cut Bar and Grill and also TK Maxx. We have also launched consultations on how we might seek to renovate some other parts of the town centre in Macclesfield, for example, on Chestergate. And we have applied to the government for some levelling up funding to support that regeneration of Macclesfield. However, I do need to just explain that Cheshire East as a borough is priority 3 in terms of levelling up, and what that means is that each borough across the country is given a priority rating according to where it sits in the national indices of deprivation, with priority 1 being the highest. Now clearly, as I say, in Cheshire East we are priority 3, so we were not successful with that bid for levelling up funding for Macclesfield at the first attempt.
So now on to questions about house building and infrastructure in the borough. Firstly, from Jane in Middlewich asking, will you please give residents an assurance that there'll be no further house building in our town, so in Middlewich, until the council has prioritised investment into improving infrastructure? So that's including repairing roads, pavements, improving the high street, access to doctors, dentists and school places, etc. She also mentions that she'd hoped to ask this question at Middlewich Town Council's recent AGM, which you, Councillor Corcoran, attended to answer questions from residents, but that the session was closed before she was able to put her question forward.
Right. Thank you. Firstly, in my response, I think I need to be clear that my views are not representing the council as the local planning authority, nor am I commenting on the merits or demerits of any live planning application. I think I can give the assurance that is sought, with a caveat around permissions already granted, which I'll elaborate on in answer to a later question. 6 years ago, Cheshire East Council didn't have up-to-date planning policies or a 5-year housing land supply. The result was that under government rules, property developers were able to get planning permission on greenfield sites, and there was a flood of speculative housing applications on greenfield sites around towns in Cheshire East. We do now have up-to-date planning policies and a robust 5-year housing land supply, so such speculative housing applications on greenfield sites could be refused today. On the comment about my visit to Middlewich Town Council, I think the chair did a good job and he allowed about 45 minutes for questions and answers, which was well over the allocated time. I thought it was a positive meeting, and I would like to take this opportunity to support the local government association's campaign for civility in public life. Please be courteous. You can disagree politely, and it's not necessary to make personal insults to get your viewpoint across.
Councillor Brown, did you have anything to add?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Well, unfortunately, national planning policy does mean that we're not able to give an absolutely cast iron guarantee on this. The local plan, which of course was signed off under the previous administration back in 2017, allocated 3 strategic housing sites for Middlewich. Those were LPS 42, that's Glebe Farm, LPS 44, which is Midpoint 18, and finally LPS 45, which was land off Warmingham Lane. Now, there are legal agreements in place which are called Section 106 agreements, and they're signed between the council and developers, and they're meant to help pay for improved infrastructure, or for new infrastructure in fact, but usually these become payable at certain trigger points during the course of the development. It can either be on completion, sometimes it's on first occupation, sometimes on 50% occupation, and sometimes on 100% occupation. So the funding isn't usually in place before the houses have been constructed. Now, having said that, sometimes the council is able to forward fund by borrowing at risk against the Section 106 monies it expects to receive. So, for example, this is how the Middlewich Eastern Bypass is in part being funded. So there's a grant from central government, there's a council contribution, of course, but then there are these Section 106 funds as well. But it's important, I think, for us to say that the Section 106 funds can only be used for new or improved infrastructure. They're not able to be used for routine maintenance.
So Guy from Winterley has asked about the council's approach to consultations and specifically about residents' comments about planning applications. So does the council genuinely listen to the views submitted?
Yes, I can assure you that we do. Just to give one example, in the last budget consultation, there was a clear call for more funding for road repairs. So the council agreed to borrow £19 million to fund proactive level 2 highways maintenance works over the next 3 years. Planning is a slightly different matter in that if a planning application is refused, then the developer can appeal to the planning inspectorate, who will overturn the refusal unless there were sound planning reasons for the refusal. I mentioned earlier about the flood of speculative housing applications when Cheshire East Council didn't have up-to-date planning policies in place. Many of those applications were approved on appeal after being refused by Cheshire East Council. That's why it's so important to have up-to-date planning policies and a robust 5-year housing land supply, and we do have those now and are working to improve the policies further. There have been recent government proposals to have less local involvement in individual planning decisions. Now, the number of houses built since that flood of speculative housing applications has put huge strain on local services, and that is a problem this administration has inherited, and it will take a long time to fix it. The first step is to stop the problem getting worse, and that step has been taken by having up-to-date housing policies so that the flood has stopped. But, as predicted at the time, the number of new houses is causing problems for doctors' surgeries, school places, traffic congestion and council services such as children's services.
Craig, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, now the Croxton Lane site is proposed housing allocation for around 50 new homes. And that's referenced in the council's emerging site allocations and development policies document, or to give it another title, local plan part 2, effectively. But I would like to assure residents, everybody listening, that our planning officers do take on board the views of residents, and that these are carefully considered with every planning application. And so a decision that's made that is contrary to those views doesn't mean that those views have simply been ignored, but planning officers are under an obligation to determine applications in accordance not just with the national planning policy framework, but with the Cheshire East local plan policies as well. Of course, in order to have an extra level of influence, some communities have been bringing forward neighbourhood development plans that have the ability to contain some additional localised policies that help those applications be determined.
Now, finally on this subject, Samantha from Middlewich has been in touch. She's saying that a housing development has been proposed for more than 200 houses on a greenfield site opposite her home. She thinks it has outline planning permission. Now, when the houses where she lives were built, they were told by the builder that the land opposite would never be built on. And she says that at a previous council meeting, it was said that greenfield building would no longer be granted. So why is the building of more homes in an area that she says is struggling with infrastructure already being allowed?
The planning system has a two-stage approach, with most applications coming forward first as outline applications and then coming back later as detailed applications. Once outline permission has been granted, then the principle of development has been established, and it is just the detail that is to be worked out at the detailed application stage. Any attempt to block a planning permission at the detailed planning application stage is likely to result in an appeal to the planning inspectorate, and the inspector would be likely to take a dim view and not only allow the appeal but also award costs. So once an application has outline permission, then the principle of development has been decided. I sympathise with the plight of many people who've bought a house thinking they would be looking out over open countryside, only to find that houses are being built there. A good conveyancing solicitor should have warned purchasers of the outline planning permission granted nearby. Unless the government changes the planning rules, and as I've already mentioned, the government proposals have been to give less power to local authorities and local communities and more power to developers, then the best the local councillors can do is to mitigate the problem by ensuring that the details of the housing development are good quality and well designed.
Next on to questions about highways maintenance, about point and shared space schemes specifically, also about gully clearing in the borough as well. So Simon from Poynton has written in. Simon asks, I'd like to know why, after previously investing in Poynton shared space and turning the town into a vibrant, attractive and safer town, has it been abandoned with disintegrating road surfaces?
Well, thank you, Simon, for that question. Yeah, the highways team are very aware of the deterioration of the tiles that form part of that shared space scheme. And if I can offer you some reassurance, it's always been their intention to look at undertaking repairs once the two major pieces of new road infrastructure, those being the A6 Mar and of course the Poynton Relief Road in the area, have been completed. So as a council, we've been we are in the process of investing an extra £7 million this year, followed by £6 million next year and a further £6 million a year after in highways maintenance. And I think this investment will start to deliver an impact over the course of the next 3 years. What we really need, though, is a comprehensive settlement from government rather than the settlement we currently get, which I think fails to take account of the fact that we are a semi-rural borough. So, for example, today our highway service has a backlog of £180 million worth of road repairs that need to be carried out. And our government grant for this year was just 15 million, so basically less than 10% of the amount that we need.
Now, Dorothy, also from Poynton, has written in with I think a linked question, asking about the damage she's saying that's being done to decorative features around Park Lane by HGVs. Was this not considered when the scheme was first designed? Is there anything you'd like to add for Dorothy?
Thank you, Dorothy. Well, firstly, I probably need to explain the Poynton Shared Scheme was introduced in 2012. Now, to put that in some kind of context, I wasn't elected as a councillor until 2015. However, speaking purely as a resident now, somebody who used to drive through Poynton, on my daily commute from Oldley Edge to Marple at that time. I have to say that I do think traffic flows have improved significantly as a result of the scheme. But of course, the current administration is now engaged in building the Poynton Relief Road, which I think will further reduce congestion in and around Poynton, and we're expecting that new road to open in the late autumn of this year, which is very good news, of course. On the point about disabled parking, just a reminder really that, of course, disabled residents who are in possession of a blue badge may park on any road, even on WR lines, provided that they're not causing an obstruction. That's for up to 3 hours.
Okay, now Richard from Poynton has also asked about maintenance around Poynton shared space and also specifically around gully clearing.
Well, there were, I think it's fair to say, many gullies across the borough that hadn't been emptied really since Cheshire East Council's inception back in 2009. And this is something that as a joint administration we have recognised and we are seeking to address. So we are investing more money in gully emptying, and with the result that now all gullies across the borough are being emptied on at least a 2-year cycle. We've also introduced, by the way, an online gully checker. So this allows residents to have a look on our website, cheshireeast.gov.uk, and see when their gullies were last emptied, but also when they're next going to be emptied as well. So you can also check whether the gully was blocked when the team arrived on site to do the clearing work. And looking at the tracker, I can see that Poynton was last cleaned in May last year and is due to be cleared again in May 2023. So that's as a predominantly they are emptied on a biennial cycle now. However, I do want to say that your local ward councillors do also have a role to play in this. They can put in ad hoc sweeping requests, and the highways team also carry out targeted clear and cleanse days in response to requests from local ward members.
Now we've also had again another similar question from Peter, this time from Congleton, who's asked about the council's policy on gully clearing and road sweeping, and mentioning Padbury Lane in Congleton specifically. I don't know if there's anything you want to build on or to add to your answer to the previous question.
Just briefly to explain that our arm's length company Answer do have one truck mounted road sweeper in the Congleton area, but also to highlight that the town council also operate a compact sweeper, and of course they carry out manual sweeping in the area as well. Now, unfortunately, due to traffic calming measures that had to be implemented, in part mitigation for the Congleton Link Road, the bollards that had to be put in place do actually prevent Answer vehicles being able to sweep behind them. So I think potentially the solution to this might lie in a conversation with Congleton Town Council to see whether they are able to carry out any manual sweeping or any sweeping using their compact sweeper.
And on to some questions about active travel and cycling in the borough. Richard from Macclesfield has asked what the council has done in the last 2 years to make cycling and walking safer from Victoria Road and Upton Priory areas into the town. And if that's nothing, what may be delivered in the next 2 years?
Yeah, so if I can say firstly that I share Richard's interest in this topic. The council has brought forward a number of cycling and active travel schemes and is seeking to develop more, either as part of the town centre local transport plans or the town centre vitality plans, or indeed the sustainable modes of transport to school schemes. But unfortunately, just because those schemes are in a planning document doesn't mean that they're automatically funded. Typically what happens is local authorities now have to bid to central government for discretionary funding in order to bring these schemes forward. But I would like to say, having those plans in place and having consulted on them, so that we can hopefully demonstrate a high level of public support, does strengthen our chances of getting the funding when the bidding rounds open. But to a large extent, we are in the hands of central government in terms of when and if they decide to launch a bidding round for this kind of infrastructure funding. Having said this, we have been successful in bidding for local growth funding in respect of the Alderley Road cycleway in Wilmslow, the Northwest Crewe cycleway, which is currently just started construction, and also the Manchester Road cycleway in Tytherington as well. It's worth possibly also just pointing out that we've introduced a 3.5 metre cycleway as part of the Congleton Link Road that opened last year, and a similar scheme is currently being developed and delivered as part of the new Point and Relief Road that's due to open in November of this year.
Okay, now Diana, who's recently moved to Disley, is asking what plans the council has to make it safer for residents, and she's saying especially women and children and anyone who's not confident on a bike to walk and cycle alongside the A6 and the surrounding roads.
Well, if I can say that I am acutely aware of the issues in and around Disley, particularly around Red House Lane, and I have been out to discuss these with Disley Parish Council. Cheshire East Highways have drawn up detailed proposals to improve the pedestrian links and also safety, but we're waiting for approval from Network Rail for that scheme to be implemented. And I'd like to just add that I do have a further meeting scheduled with Disley Parish Council shortly, and I look forward to coming out to Disley and listening to their concerns. But I think the leader has a little more that he would like to say on this.
Thank you, and I'm very keen to promote cycling. It's good for the planet because if you cycle rather than drive, then you're reducing carbon emissions, and it's good for your health as well. The biggest inhibitor stopping people cycling is fears over safety. Now, we have responded to some recent consultations by removing some temporary measures, and that's what the consultation results said. So we do listen to consultation responses. So the first message I put out there is please respond to consultations about schemes to promote safe cycling. The second point is that funding is an issue, and here there is some good news. Because Cheshire East Council followed government guidance in putting in temporary active travel schemes during the pandemic and retained some of them for the full 18 months, the government awarded Cheshire East Council over £500,000 for cycle schemes. However, that's nowhere near enough to implement all the schemes that are necessary to change the culture to encourage more people to cycle. Just as an example, over £1 million was spent on the recently completed Wilmslow cycle scheme that Craig mentioned earlier.
So next question is from Nigel in Macclesfield, and he's asking about relationships with our local MPs. So what do you do to make sure that MPs are using their influence in the interests of the council?
Well, yes, we do meet regularly with the MPs. Those meetings are private to facilitate discussions, and they're surprisingly positive given the political makeup. Just as an example, there's been very strong support from local MPs for Crewe's bid to be the site of the new headquarters for Great British Railways. In addition, Cheshire East Council has a dedicated team who respond to MPs' queries. These are often queries on behalf of residents, so the MP responds to the resident, but it is actually Cheshire East Council that has prepared most of that answer. Now, I'd be interested to hear Craig's response to that question as well, which might have a slightly different political perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Well, I think, as you said, we do have quarterly meetings with all 5 MPs, and I would agree generally they are very constructive. For example, we've worked closely with David Rutley on the Point and Relief Road and continue to work with him on the A6 corridor study. On a wider note, as you said, all 5 MPs are backing our bid to bring the HQ of the Great British Railways home to Crewe. Although, of course, not all are equally supportive of bringing HS2 to the borough. So where there are opportunities for us to work together for the good of everyone in the borough, then I think that we do so. And examples of this include the Middlewich Eastern Bypass and also the A500 dualling. Where I would like them to do more is in lobbying their own government for more adequate funding settlement for road maintenance. The amount that we receive is just 1/4% of the value of our highways network. And last year we had actually a 23% cut in our road maintenance budget, and that's remained the same for this year. So as a council, we're investing £19 million of our own money over the course of the next 3 years, but we're having to do that through borrowing. And I would like to encourage our MPs to lobby for more of this money on our behalf from central government.
So since we originally filmed this, we've had the brilliant news that Crewe has been shortlisted for the Great British Railway headquarters. Sam, did you want to say anything about this?
First, thanks to the Cheshire East Council officers who put forward a really strong bid to the government, setting out the technical reasons why Crewe is the obvious place for the headquarters of Great British Railways. But while we all know that Crewe is at the heart of rail, we now need to win the public vote. So please, everybody, vote for Crewe to be the headquarters of Great British Railways. You can find a link at gbrcrewe.co.uk. So please vote, get all your friends and families to vote for Crewe.
From my perspective, I mean, this is just excellent news for Crewe, but it's also excellent news for the northwest of the country as well. Crewe, as we already know, is at the heart of rail, but Crewe has several things going for it. Crewe has the people, 3 million people within a 45-minute commute of the town. It has the skills, 12 major universities within an hour's commute of Crewe. And finally, the only northern station on the main line with a direct connection to all of the UK's capital cities, and even to the ferry terminal at Holyhead as well. So please do back Crewe for the bid. gbrcrewe.co.uk. Please go and vote.
Thank you. Now let's get back to the questions. So now on to some questions about parking charges in the borough. Andy from Poynton is asking why Cheshire East Council introduced parking charges at Nelson Pit in Poynton, despite objections at the time, and asks, will you consider reviewing that decision?
Well, firstly, the parking charges at Nelson Pit car park were introduced under the previous administration in 2016. Whilst I can't commit to reversing that decision, I do believe that we need to take a holistic review of parking charges across the borough. We do, of course, still have a number of free car parks, and of course we're continuing with the free after 3 initiative on certain car parks as well. We do also look to benchmark against some of our neighbouring authorities, and I have to say that the vast majority of our parking charges are either in line with or indeed cheaper than some of our neighbours.
Okay, now Robert from Nantwich asks, how can you justify in certain towns that parking is free, but in others, including Nantwich, where he lives, it's expensive?
Well, I quite agree with Robert that just retaining the status quo, where some residents of the borough pay for parking, whilst others don't, simply isn't sustainable. In September last year, we brought proposals for a flat level tariff to be implemented across the borough, which I think would have been fair for everyone. But unfortunately, a majority of the members of the committee didn't support the proposals, instead preferring the unfairness to continue. And all I can add to that is that the independent members of the committee all voted in favour of the proposals.
Now on to a question that came in separately from Andrew in Crewe and Carol also from Crewe. They've both written in to ask if the closure of Middlewich Road in Crewe, relating to the North West Crewe package works, and whether that can be reviewed.
So the North West Crewe package, first of all, is a major infrastructure project for the council, which in the long run will relieve congestion and of course improve access to Leighton Hospital as well. But there's a well-worn saying that you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, and similarly you can't deliver a major infrastructure project without some level of disruption. But firstly, if I can just address a couple of myths. The Middlewich Road is not being closed for 80 weeks. The project in its entirety is expected to take 80 weeks, but full and partial closures of Middlewich Road will be in place between now and March 2023. So the first closure, which is between Pims Lane and Smithy Lane, is in place until the end of October. And that's due to allow 2 new roundabouts to be constructed, along with new drainage, new curbing and surfacing works. But to allow this to happen, the existing road has to be removed and it also has to be excavated to a depth of about 1.2 metres. I want to add that we're making sure that access is maintained for both businesses and residents at all times. Now, we did consult with the emergency services as part of the planned closures, and a blue light route has been agreed, both with the ambulance service but also with Leighton Hospital as well, and clearly we'll continue to engage with both parties throughout the whole duration of the works. Now, I also want to say the extent of the original closures and traffic management was going to be 22 miles of diversion, but we've already reviewed that and reduced it to about 10.6 miles. But we appreciate that it's not ideal. However, a safety zone has to be established while people are working, and clearly the safety of the public but also our workforce has to be paramount in our considerations here. But longer term, the project is going to help unlock the delivery of more than 1,200 new homes and help develop a sustainable community with new local services, with green infrastructure, with things like allotments and walking and cycling routes, outdoor sports and recreation facilities, and also a new school. So in the long term, this really is a win-win for the area.
Next, on to a question from Paul in Ollerton about planning processing times. So Paul's written in to ask about delays in the planning application process. He's asked specifically around his own application, but I think there's a broader question here.
Yeah, thank you. And just to be clear again, I'm not commenting on the merits or demerits of any live planning application, but on the general point, there is a national shortage of planning officers, and COVID has had a serious impact on the council's planning service, and there is a backlog of planning applications. I would like to apologise to customers who've been waiting a significant amount of time to have their planning application assigned. Additional external support has been brought in to help reduce the backlog of applications. Furthermore, a full review of the planning service is being undertaken with a view to improving the customer experience and communication with customers, recruiting more staff and reducing that backlog of planning applications. Applicants and agents can assist the council by making sure that they submit all the necessary information for applications at the start of the process, ensuring they comply with the necessary validation checklists and showing as much detail as possible on plans such as relationship to any large trees on site, distance to boundaries, etc., as otherwise this could delay matters further. Photographs of the site and surroundings may also assist officers and help to get a decision as promptly as possible once it is allocated.
So Peter from Warmingham has written in to ask, why do council departments never acknowledge or respond to emails, letters or website submissions?
I've previously mentioned about the work the council does in dealing with resident queries received via MPs. The council also spends a lot of resource in dealing with Freedom of Information Act requests and dealing with correspondence. as do many individual councillors who represent the residents of their ward. I do understand and acknowledge the comments that are being made, though.
Now on to questions relating to the proposals for the South Macclesfield development area at Danes Moss, relating to the council's carbon neutral ambition. Firstly, from Simon in Macclesfield, he says, many people will be confused by the green and climate change policies being promoted by the council, while at the same time the council appears to be driving the development at Danes Moss in Macclesfield. That's Cheshire East's largest lowland raised peat bog, which could be fantastic for carbon sequestration. Surely the council should be promoting its restoration.
Thank you. Before I answer these questions, I need to be clear on a number of points. There is a live planning application concerning proposals at South Macclesfield, and therefore, to be clear in my response, my views are not representing the council as the local planning authority, nor am I commenting on the merits or demerits of the live application. Similarly, Councillor Brown, who is sharing this platform, is also not making any comments on any live application, which he may be a part of at a future planning committee. Immediately after I became leader of Cheshire East Council in May 2019, the council committed to being carbon neutral by 2025. Since then, the council has adopted a new environment strategy and a carbon neutral action plan setting out in detail how we will achieve that commitment of the council being carbon neutral by 2025. As I've already mentioned, as part of those plans, 50,000 trees have been planted on Cheshire East Council land. Trees are a great way of capturing and storing carbon. Soil management is also a way of capturing and storing carbon, and I'd like to praise the work being done by Reese Heath College in this area. Peat bogs also capture and store carbon, and I think here I need to define the terms that I'm using. I'm using the term peat bog as an area where sphagnum moss is growing and absorbing carbon. Sphagnum moss grows in wet conditions, and as it and other plants die, they submerge into the water and over a long period of time form peat. For an area under which there are substantial deposits of peat, but there is not active sphagnum moss growing, I'm using the term peatland, and the term degraded peatland for an area where that area has been drained, damaged, eroded or excavated. Some peatlands are more easily restorable to peat bogs than others. Cheshire East Council is restoring a peat bog at Pastures Wood near Goresworth, and that is going well. There are also plans to restore areas around Lindow Moss near Wilmslow. Further mosses can be found across the borough, including Wimbury Moss, Brookhouse Moss, Anglesey Basin Mire, and Danes Moss Site of Special Scientific Interest, which is under the control of Cheshire Wildlife Trust. At South Macclesfield, an outline planning approval was granted several years ago. The current detailed planning application is to be considered by the council in its role as the local planning authority in due course, and appropriate information on mitigations and methodology would likely be required in statements around environment and ecology.
We've also heard from another Macclesfield resident who writes in a similar vein, are Cheshire East implementing their carbon neutral policy on the land off Congleton Road, which is currently in the South Macclesfield development plan and is actually peatland? If not, the writer would like to know why not. And does the council ever use legislation to stop development of peatland, which may have had historical outline planning permission for development?
Yeah, again, my views are not representing the council as the local planning authority, nor am I commenting on the merits or demerits of that live application. I would say, though, there are developments in Macclesfield where the peat is being dug out and removed from the site. However, I'd refer you to the documents to be considered within the ongoing planning process as supporting documentation that should outline methodology and development approach.
Okay, and finally on this from Adina in Macclesfield, the council has a policy of enhancing natural capital, which references peatland restoration, as I think you've already mentioned. Can you tell me, please, where the peatland is being restored as part of this policy?
Yeah, Cheshire East Council has been involved in the restoration of a peat bog at Pastures Farm near Goresworth. I'm also aware of planning around restoring parts of Lindau Moss near Wilmslow. I mentioned before about the importance of having up-to-date planning policies. A supplementary planning policy on biodiversity net gain is currently being developed by Cheshire East Council. The consultation phase has been completed and I hope that it will be approved soon. However, at present it is not adopted policy and so could not be enforced on any private planning applications.
Now, Councillor Brown, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. So again, this site was identified as a strategic site within the Cheshire East local plan that was approved under the previous administration in 2017. Now, whilst it is possible that the local plan will be reviewed over the course of the next few years, removing housing sites that have already got outline permission is not risk-free. I think it's important that we understand this. The planning inspector, acting on behalf of central government, sets each local authority targets for building new homes over the course of that local plan period. And as long as our trajectory of permissions and builds remains ahead of that target, in other words, we can continue to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, then there is no problem. But if at any point we fall below that 5-year target, it potentially opens up other areas of the borough, potentially green belts, potentially conservation areas to challenge from developers. So with the South Macclesfield development area in the plan and earmarked for development, the threat to us not remaining ahead of that 5-year target is minimal. But if the South Macclesfield development area were to be removed from the plan, there is a risk that developers may succeed in bringing forward far less appropriate areas for development. Now, the area identified in the local plan for development has limited environmental and ecological benefit, and there's been an independent assessment of that to confirm that it's the case. But against this has to be balanced the council's ability to use that part of the site which it owns for the delivery of some truly affordable housing. So that's the balancing act that we're facing, and those are the issues that we need to consider.
Now, Samantha in Macclesfield asks, given the council's policy on reducing the frequency of mowing grassed areas and leaving more areas to grow unchecked, would it be possible to take this one step further and stop mowing all steeply banked areas? So areas that require hand mowing are inaccessible for walkers and can't be used for leisure activities and generally comprise of marginal borders. They're costly to mow, and given they're unusable, could they not be left to grow, at least until the end of the flowering season in September? This is save money and improve biodiversity.
Well, firstly, what a great idea, Samantha. This really is. This is definitely something that we'll want to take away and have a look at in more detail. So thank you for mentioning it. To some extent, we're already doing this. We've had successful trials in some of our parks and open spaces, and there are going to be further trials taking place to increase the use of wildflower mix in South Park in Macclesfield and also Riverside at Nantwich, and equally in some of our larger parks which are managed by ANSA Environmental Services. Grassed areas that show promise to enable nature and wildlife to thrive are going to be mown less often. But it is perhaps worth mentioning that we are responsible for a whopping 5.8 million square metres of high-waste grass verge across the borough. Clearly, it's not going to be appropriate for us to simply stop mowing all of that, but there may well be sections that could be mown less frequently. So this is definitely something that we'll want to look at, assess and potentially make changes to going forwards, principally for reasons of encouraging biodiversity, but also to try and save costs, because clearly mowing 5.8 million square metres of grassland is very costly to the council, and by extension to the residents through their council tax also.
Now, Sam, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, again, I think it's a great idea, and I would encourage people to contact their local council if they've got specific areas in mind. To give an example, the Old Mill Road bypass in Sandbach, that has steep banks and they are left to grow long, and we do get some lovely wildflowers at this time of year. But there are other areas where you need to cut the grass to maintain the visibility splays, to maintain safety on the highways network.
So that's an end to all the questions from residents that we can answer today. Sam, have you got any closing remarks?
Well, thank you to all those who have submitted questions to this question and answer session with the Leader and Deputy. This is part of the commitment set out in our corporate plan to be open, fair and green as a council.
And Craig, have you got anything you'd like to add?
And if I could just add to that and express my thanks to everybody who engaged with this session. Thank you for sending your questions in. We will be running a further question and answer session with the Leader and Deputy Leader in the near future. So if you weren't able to get a question in this time, please do send them in next time and we'll be delighted to answer them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much. I'd just like to say that if you wanted to watch the first edition of the conversation we will put the link to the video in the notes for this video. And if you want to find out about council services, remember you can go to the Cheshire East Council website at cheshireeast.gov.uk or speak to your local councillor. So just finally, I would like to say thank you very much to Councillor Sam Corcoran, the Leader of the Council.
Thank you.
And Councillor Craig Brown, Deputy Leader of the Council.
Thank you and goodbye.